JBS viewers. Welcome to the ISGAP Hour. I'm David Harris, Executive Vice Chair of ISGAP, the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. And as always on this show, I'm joined by the visionary founder and CEO of ISGAP, Dr. Charles Small. And this week, we have a very special treat for you. Dalia Ziada may be known to some of you. At the end of the show, I think you'll understand why all of you need to know about Dalia Ziada and follow her career. From Egypt, she has been an activist, a seeker of peace, and a staunch opponent of anti-Semitism. And recently she joined ISGAP as a research analyst. So we're delighted to have Dalia on the show. Dalia, welcome.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with you, David, and you, Charles, and being part of this fight against hate and for peace.
So Dalia, I'm sure many of our viewers who may not have met you before are going to ask the question, why do you do this work? What motivated you? Was it something in your family, something in your childhood? What explains why you're here fighting anti-Semitism and actually standing up for Israel's right to live at peace in the region?
Absolutely.
What explains it?
Actually, it's not my family or my childhood. It was the opposite. My family and childhood experiences actually primed me to be anti-Semitic myself. I grew up in a very hostile, in an environment that is very hostile to the Jewish people, to Israel. In my school, I would read textbooks about the 1973 Yom Kippur War with Israel. Every year we celebrate the anniversary of the war with Israel and never knew about that we had a peace treaty with Israel until I grew up and became a teenager. And it was always referred to as a security agreement, not even a peace treaty. In the mosques on every Friday when we attend the sermons, there is a stable prayer that is actually a curse to the Jews and to Israel. So imagine growing in this environment was it was very natural for me to take the side that hated Israel. Until something really amazing happened to me when I was 18 years old. It was the year of the second Intifada, but I don't want anyone to calculate my age. So I was 18 years old at that time. I was a freshman student or fresh woman in the university in Cairo, an undergraduate university, Ain Shams University in Cairo. And of course, all the campuses at that time were firing with protests and encampments, and very similar to what we're seeing here, in support of Gaza, which later on, when I look back, it was actually in support of Hamas. And we were very influenced by Al Jazeera TV. It was very new at that time. And they were showering us with footage from Gaza. The suicide bombing was a big deal at that time. And I was part of the protests against Israel. I joined them. Until in a beautiful sunny day, about 2 months into protesting, in a beautiful sunny day like most of the days in Cairo are, I was in the protest, and the people organizing the protest, whom later on I knew are the Muslim Brotherhood, they decided to burn some flags. So they started first by burning the Israeli flag, which made sense because it's a protest against Israel. Then they burned the American flag. I couldn't make the connection, like, America is like tens of thousands of miles away. Why it has to do with our situation? And then they burned the Egyptian flag. And this was created some kind of cognitive dissonance in my head, in my heart, that I told myself these cannot be good people, and at the same time burn my flag. The flag is a big deal in Egypt. We have very strong nationalist sentiments, so it's a big deal. So they cannot be good people and at the same time do this. So this was the moment I broke out of the ideological box I was stuck into my whole life. And for the first time, I decided just not to wait for people to tell me what to do, but just take a step back and educate myself about all of this stuff, starting with Israel, the geopolitics of the Middle East, educate myself about Judaism also, and I would proudly say, but being a religious person myself, I fell in love with Judaism as a religion. It's a great religion, and its emphasis on making this life, our life today, a great thing is very unique. So this is how I changed it. This is how all of a sudden I became on the other side, and it has become my life mission since then to fight against radical Islamists and political Islamists as well, like the Muslim Brotherhood, and also to fight for Muslim-Jewish relations and Arab-Israeli peace.
Dalia, that's an extraordinary story, but it begs the obvious question, how did your family react? How did your friends react to this transformation in you at age 18?
Actually, in the process of learning and educating myself about the issue, I lost many friends because it required, visiting things like the Hebrew department in my university, going to the cultural centers affiliated to either the American embassy or the Israeli embassy. And if you go to these places, you're always labeled, you will be automatically labeled as someone suspicious. So I lost a lot of friends in the process. For my family, of course, they were not very happy with what I'm doing, especially my mother. But my father was very, very supportive. He's always told me, be the flower in the trash. And that's why he called me Dalia, actually. And I believe at the time he gave me this name, he knew what it means. And he knew somehow it could be a Hebrew name, and he wouldn't mind. I mean,
there are many Israeli women who also have the name Dalia.
Exactly. So
one of the many things in common.
Exactly. That's right. So yes, I lost many people in the process, including members of my own family. But over time, my only focus was to be the flower in the trash, do something to make even if my environment is a trash, I will be committed to be the flower. So, and I followed my father's advice. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. He died a long time ago. And this was very devastating to me, but I kept his memory by just doing what he told me to be.
He must have been a very wise man.
Thank you. He was a military engineer, actually. You would think that he would also adopt this extremist ideology, not extremist, religiously extremist, but in terms of the relationship with Israel that the military adopts. But he was also a Sufi. So religion-wise, so he had this liberal spirit and reformist spirit inside of him.
So Dalia, before turning it over to Charles, you said that you were taught that the relationship with Israel was actually a security arrangement rather than a peace treaty. Could you describe from an Egyptian perspective how you see the state of relations between Egypt and Israel since 1979? In other words, for Israel, this was seen as the big breakthrough, that real peace, real coexistence, open borders would emerge. From the Egyptian point of view, has it been more than a security arrangement or not?
At the very beginning, when the peace treaty was made and was called for by the leaders in Israel and Egypt, it was so real. They were tired of warring with each other. They wanted a pause, and not only a pause, they wanted peace. It's not hudna, it's not a truce. They really wanted peace. So they can take care of developing their own communities and societies and focus on what really matters. So they were very sincere about it. And I think the people somehow were ready about it. I mean, when Sadat signed the peace treaty and he came back to Cairo, there were protests receiving him with applause. People were not objecting him. Actually, they were happy he did so. So finally, we can focus on Egypt or the internal economy, domestic development, and so. So this was good. However, unfortunately, this period of time also witnessed the rise of Islamist groups all over the region. The success of the Islamic revolution in Iran in 1979 inspired other Islamist groups in the region to play political roles that goes beyond their local communities. Before, for example, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt would play a political role, but it's mainly about Islamizing the Egyptian government. They did not yet think of the idea of global jihad. I'm saying it in the Arabic way, in the Egyptian way. Global jihad or becoming political leaders of a country like the Islamic revolution in Iran. This was also the period where we saw the birth of Hamas. And roughly around this time also there were similar Islamist groups appearing in Jordan, opposing the Jordan taking the initiative also to have peace with Israel and so. So with the rise of these groups, they needed to mobilize people politically or recruit people around a political cause. They needed a political cause that goes beyond Egypt, not only limited to local Arab communities, but beyond that to mobilize the people. So what was the easiest cause? They simply built on the Nasser era, the success of the Pan-Arabism movement in labeling Israel as the main enemy. And of course, the Pan-Arabist movement was labeling Israel as an enemy because they want to liberate, it's a Western imperialist entity, that we want to liberate Palestine from its hands. This was the narrative of the Pan-Arabism movement. Now, when the Islamists came in, they changed the narrative a little bit to give it an Islamic tint. So it has become, instead of let's liberate Palestine from the Western imperialist entity, now it's let's liberate Al-Aqsa Mosque and Jerusalem, our Muslim holy sites, from the Jewish Zionists who are misusing it or who are mishandling our holy sites. And all of a sudden it has become a Muslim-Jewish conflict, not anymore an Arab-Israeli conflict or an Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I think this is the problem we're living today. But going back to Sadat, yes, it was a peace treaty. Everyone was very excited about it at the very, very beginning, because also it came with many economic benefits to Egypt, like the military aid and the economic aid from the United States and so. And then in the 1980s, it lost momentum because they cannot anymore say, especially after the assassination of Sadat, they cannot, and the rise of the Islamists, they cannot be proud of it anymore. It's like something to keep aside. And this remained the case until today. But I think the main problem was the rush in signing the peace treaty before specifying the exact terms, because in conflict resolution there is this thing about trust building, and some people think that for trust building to happen, let's come into agreements first and then later we can discuss the details of this agreement. And I believe this was the mistake that made the peace treaty with Egypt unable to sustain for a long time as peace treaty and not only being seen as a security agreement. We signed the peace treaty, but Israel did not request Egypt to stop, for example, its media war, its anti-Semitic rhetoric, its hatred to Israel in mosques and schools and so. So all of these things were not agreed upon beforehand. That's why we ended up in this situation. Yes, we have a peace treaty, but the society is in a different place. They are thinking in a very different way because they are indoctrinated in a certain way that makes it very difficult for them to keep up with this amazing things that happen in the peace treaty.
Yeah. Lots of questions, but Charles, take over.
Okay, many questions. So first of all, as our viewers may know, one of the major projects that we have at ISGAP is Follow the Money. We're looking at how the Muslim Brotherhood through Qatar is funding American higher education and really having an impact in the classroom, in the sort of the academic intellectual discourse in our best universities, which is informing SJP and the student encampments and the environment on campus intellectually and also socially and even physically now, where Jewish students and faculty are really under a lot of threats. And we're very happy and honored that you're part of the research team. We have an incredible research team. And now you're working on a specific report called The Project. And for the viewers who don't know, The Project is the Muslim Brotherhood strategic goals when it comes to the United States and Israel. The strategic goals, the security forces in Switzerland and the United States about 40 years ago found documentation showing that the Muslim Brotherhood wanted to move Israel away from the United States, to isolate it, to weaken it, and to destroy it. The Muslim Brotherhood, for our viewers who may not know, want to destroy the state of Israel and murder Jews around the world. They really are inspired by the protocols of the Elders of Zion and old even Nazi ideology. And they fuse it with a perversion, I would argue, of Islam. So they want to destroy Israel. And what's also interesting is use anti-Semitism to fragment and weaken the United States of America. And if we take a step back, it seems that in the past 40 years, a lot of progress has been made on these strategic objectives. Given your research and given what's happening in the United States, you've left Egypt after October the 7th when you spoke out against Hamas, and now you've arrived here. And it seems like the politics that you fled and were engaged in studying and learning about in Egypt are here. So how do you, what is your, it must be shocking that you've come to the United States of America and you see the same discourse here. What are your comments on what I've just said?
Thank you, Charles. First of all, it's a big honor to be part of this team. Great research team who are fighting all the fights on behalf of Western values and democracy and human rights and coexistence and all the great fights, actually. And of course, given the fact that we're doing these fights, our biggest enemy will be always the people who are promote hatred as the center of their ideology. And on the top of the list are the Islamists. So the project I'm working on with ISGAP now, it's true, like our focus is the Muslim Brotherhood, but actually our target is Islamists at large. And why our focus is the Muslim Brotherhood? Because although the Muslim Brotherhood, okay, maybe they are right when they claim that, you know, we are not a terrorist organization because we don't carry weapons and go kill people. Okay, but they created the ideology upon which all the Islamist, violent jihadist organizations are using to kill people.
Including Hamas.
Including Hamas. Hamas actually is a direct offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, but also including Salafist jihadist organizations, global jihadists with all the different names, starting from Al-Qaeda up to ISIS to HTS and so on. I mean, there are many names. So they created this ideology, and this is why our target now is to fight against the ideology itself, which is a very, very tough fight, of course, as you know, given the restrictions we have with American laws here and how we can justify this fight to get American lawmakers involved in this fight as well and help us designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. So the first step in the project, in our research project, is to study the project of the Muslim Brotherhood. In the 1990s, here, the FBI investigations found something very interesting. They found documents drafted by the Muslim Brotherhood leaders who first came to the US in the 1970s and 80s as immigrants after they were cracked on in the Middle East by also the Nasser communist movement and the Pan-Arabists, and even by Saudi Arabia at that time, because they saw them as a threat to their Salafist ideology. And so they were pushed out of the region and they went to American and European capitals and to the UK. And so in order to continue their fight, continue their plan, when they came to these communities, to these Western communities, of course they couldn't do the same thing they were doing in Arab and Muslim communities, because people here will not accept. So they designed a very smart plan. They call it the 100 years plan. And anyone can find it online, actually. It has 13 objectives. And these 13 objectives are mainly about, the title we can give to them is sabotaging America from within. Why sabotaging America from within? To destroy, because America is the mother of the free world. So destroy the mother of the free world, or the big Satan, as the Iranian regime calls. And Israel is the small Satan, as you know. So destroy this mother of the free world so we can replace it with our Islamic caliphate system and achieve what we couldn't achieve in the Middle East. We will now achieve it on a global scale. This plan is so devious that they actually, if you look at what happened in the past 5 years, not only 5 years, actually, if we look back even from the start of the BDS movement, like 15 years ago, BDS is boycott, divest, and sanction Israel. It's a movement led by also anti-Semitic people who claim that they are doing this in support of Gazans and Palestinians and the Israel and the so-called Palestinian cause. And so if we look at how they did it, it's exactly the implementation of the 100 years plan of the Muslim Brotherhood. The plan looks at the powerful or the most influential institutions in the American society and asks how we can target them. These institutions include governmental bureaus like federal bureaus, like the State Department, for example. And actually one of the ways they have invaded and influenced the State Department was not by going directly to the State Department, but as one of our big projects in Follow the Money mentioned, it happens through universities, going to certain universities that actually most of its graduates join these federal offices and indoctrinated them with the same evil ideology, so to occupy these offices. Number two was the Congress and the Senate, how to control them by sending their second generations, their children to work in these offices, like staff members for, staffers for Congress members and so. And they are successful. If you look at most of the congressional offices today, I won't say from which party, but people can guess, they are there. And they are the ones who are making decisions about serious things, about even asylum cases, you know, whom to accept and whom not to accept. And imagine if they have control over this, it tells you how many evil actors they allowed to get into the United States in the past few years or blocked, which is very dangerous and very delicate. I mean, it's very, very sensitive. So this is one thing. And the third thing, which was the biggest deal in my opinion, is university campuses. And for so long, actually, we have been thinking, okay, you know, the movement or the Islamist movement and the Islamist organizations that are affiliated in particular with the Muslim Brotherhood on campuses are you know, just peaceful people, peaceful students who are, you know, but actually they are not, because as soon as the recent October 7 attack happened in Israel, they showed us the real face. I've been involved in fighting against these people actually since long time ago, and I was working with the American Islamic Congress a few years ago, and we had projects on campus to fight against the influence of the Muslim Brotherhood, the indoctrination of the Muslim Brotherhood to the students. And our target was mainly the BDS campaign. But look now, you have Students for Justice in Palestine, Students for so and so in Palestine, Students for so, and so many small organizations working under the same umbrella with the same funding. And it's not my claim. People can go to the report issued by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence here in the United States in July 2024, and it's also available online, that investigated into the encampments that were held last year in the spring, last academic year, by supporters of Gaza or the Palestinian cause or so, and they found out members of the Iranian intelligence and Iranian agents in the encampments. And this is an official report, but of course it was underreported in the media as usual, because it doesn't go with the narratives that most of them want. I mean, the narrative of the most biased media that the biased media want to promote. So unfortunately, the plan of the Muslim Brotherhood is being implemented under our watch, and no one is stopping it. Why? Because it's happening in different directions, different places, and doesn't seem coherent. So our goal actually is to just link the dots. In our project, I mean our research project with ISGAP, is to connect the dots between what's happening here and there by actors who may not look like they are affiliated to the Muslim Brotherhood in the NGO community, the campuses, the federal offices and so, and then come with the conclusions that everyone needs to see, is that unfortunately the Muslim Brotherhood is succeeding in achieving their 100 years plan to sabotage America from within, and we have to do something about it.
So, wonderful. A very good overview. So on April the 9th, it's amazing that you and David will be in Washington. We're having a meeting of experts on the Muslim Brotherhood and on democracy. And our goal is to try to create a policy approach to ban the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States. Many countries in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and now increasingly Austria is trying to do this. There are democratic countries trying to ban this anti-democratic, sexist, homophobic, anti-Semitic social movement. What are your views on these issues? Do you think the United States should ban the Muslim Brotherhood?
100%, no question. But you know what is the irony here, Charles? You spoke about Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and even Egypt, and I've worked with all of them in the recent past to designate the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. And the funny thing is that now they are designated as terrorist organization. I mean, the Muslim Brotherhood is designated as a terrorist organization in the United Arab Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, and in other countries also, I mean, around the world, who are not officially designating them, but putting them on certain lists to watch them, certain watch lists, like in Germany, in Russia, and so. Yet, the United States, which is the biggest target of this evil organization, is still hesitant to do so. And always the reason offered, and we've been hearing for years, number one is that our laws cannot allow this because the law requires that the Muslim Brotherhood, if you want to designate any group, this group, it's not enough to provide evidence that this group is wreaking havoc worldwide. You have to provide evidence that this group is a threat to the national security of the United States. And I think the reaction to October 7 by these groups is the biggest proof.
Exactly. I think there have been people in the United States trying to do this for decades, but it was sort of a theoretical conversation. But now, after October the 7th, we see violence breaking out at university campuses and on the streets of America, inspired by SJP and other Muslim Brotherhood affiliated organizations.
We have concrete evidence. We have so-called scholars from big universities who are now, I mean, in the Middle East celebrating terrorists like Hassan Nasrallah and so. And I'm sure people are following these stories with shock, you know. So this. Now we have the concrete evidence that the Muslim Brotherhood is a threat to the national security of America. And I think also we have a very sympathizing administration that understand this threat. And I hope they would really make a step forward with designating the Muslim Brotherhood, or at least let's start with making investigations into how they are a threat to national security here in the United States. And I believe ISGAP can be very, very helpful given the amount of information and linking the dots that we are doing every day.
So Dalia, that's exactly where I wanted to take the conversation. President Trump calls you into the Oval Office and says, tell me the 2 or 3 things that you think I should do as President of the United States with some urgency. He doesn't have time for long discussions about background and history. What are those 2 or 3 things? Obviously, one is, you just said, to Charles, the Muslim Brotherhood. What else is at the top of your policy list for Washington, D.C. now?
Actually, it sounds like, you know, like an imaginary situation, but actually we are going to do this. We are on the plan to do this at ISGAP. On April 9th, of course, you know, David, we will be involved in...
but we may or may not be with President
discussion.
Trump. So now I'm giving you the chance, yeah, exactly. And hopefully he's watching, he's among the JBS viewers, and members of his administration as well. Dalia Ziada has an opportunity to reach them directly. Here are the 2 or 3 things I think you need to do based on my long experience and understanding of the region. What are they?
Number one, do investigations, like deep investigations into the actors who represent the Muslim Brotherhood in the United States and who are hiding under different titles. These actors including NGOs, including charity organizations, and even those who are claiming that they are supporting women's rights and human rights. Or causes like the humanitarian situation in Gaza or so, and we can be very helpful in providing a list that they can start this investigation with. Number 2, there has to be a huge media campaign or educational campaign to fight against the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood as soon as possible, because they are working really fast. Do you know, right now as we speak, a new program has started by the Muslim Brotherhood organizations. It's called Education on Palestine. And you know which age group it's targeting? It's targeting high schoolers all over the United States. And we're tracking them closely. And if you see their content, you will be shocked. You will be shocked. It's not about a Palestinian state. It's not about a better future for the Palestinians. It's not about the Palestinian cause anymore. as we understand it. It's about the Palestinian cause as they understand it, which is destroying Israel. Why destroying Israel? Well, to weaken the United States, because again, it's very connected in their rhetoric and their narrative. The third thing that should happen is actually not to allow the Muslim Brotherhood to speak in the name of Muslims here or worldwide. We saw 3 moments over our recent history where the Muslim Brotherhood were able to infiltrate the government and introduce themselves as the official spokesperson of Muslims, and thus sidelining all the other Muslims actually who are speaking against them. They monopolized the narrative about Muslim and Arab issues. The first moment was the 9/11 attacks. At that time, people did not know much about Islam, I mean the American society, the Western society in general. So they jumped immediately right in and they said, okay, we are Muslim organizations. At that time, we saw organizations like CARE.
Okay.
The notorious CARE.
CARE is the Council on American Islamic Relations.
Yeah, but it's also very notorious for its bias to Hamas and to Islamist ideology.
So your point is that groups like CARE grabbed the microphone,
yes,
represented, they claimed the Muslim community in the United States, were invited to the White House and the State Department, again to represent, and that legitimized them.
Yes.
And other organizations in the Muslim world with which you were connected, for example, were marginalized.
Exactly. So this was the first big moment for them. And they kept the narrative going on even after the Arab Spring. When the Arab Spring was happening in the region, I mean, one of the reasons why the Obama administration supported the Muslim Brotherhood there was the advocacy that the Islamist organizations did here in the US, presenting it as an Islamic revolution, as if the Muslim Brotherhood are the ones who made the Arab Spring in Egypt and in Tunisia and other places. That's why the administration here supported them. And the third moment, how they infiltrated the society, is the one we are living now, the aftermath of the October 7 attack. And it's terrible, as we all are watching.
And also in our research, we discovered and now proved that the State Department under the Obama administration actually funded the Muslim Brotherhood and other radical Islamist jihadist extremists and helped them to organize, helped them to do social media and get them organized for the election that eventually led to Morsi, a professor from California who was a Muslim Brotherhood president of Egypt.
I would add to this also my personal experience as a witness on the ground at that time. I was one of the people who led the Arab Spring Revolution in Egypt, and of course we were not supporting the Muslim Brotherhood or the Salafists in any way to take over the country just a few months after the revolution. And yes, one of the reasons why they were very successful is the support that was given to them, I'm sorry to say, by American organizations and civil society groups and even government partisan organizations who spend a lot of money and funded by government organizations, big ones. I don't want to name names now, but big ones that are currently targeted by the Trump administration. They were funding them not to empower everyone, all the actors, including the liberal democratic youth who started the revolution, but specifically to empower Salafists and the Muslim Brotherhood, specifically to take over power.
But Charles, let me ask you this question. Why do you believe that the Obama administration, which you just named, why do you believe that it would go down this path? Did they genuinely believe that they could tame the Muslim Brotherhood, or the Muslim Brotherhood was essential to the conversation? Or did they understand the ideology and nonetheless decide to push ahead and support it?
It's a good question, and I think, to be frank, I don't have the answer.
And by the way, Dalia, if you also want to join this conversation, please. But Charles.
Yeah, I don't think I have the answer, but I think what Dalia was saying is that the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamists in Western democratic countries, including the United States, somehow became the authentic Muslim voice in positions of power. And moderate American Muslim citizens and British Muslim citizens and French Muslim citizens who want to live in democratic societies and be good citizens were marginalized by these Islamist jihadist groups who became the authentic voice and the partners of governments. I also think intellectually, we've now know that there's been a tremendous influence of the Muslim Brotherhood in Western intellectual discourse and universities. There's this sort of the emergence of the Red-Green Alliance. Islamists want to end Western neo-colonial interests in the developing so-called third world, and the radical left also want to weaken Western and American hegemony in different parts of the world. So there's convergence of ideological and political agendas. One wants to improve democratic principles in theory. The other wants to replace democracy with an Islamist caliphate. And I think there's ignorance in the West of this, the implications of this Red-Green Alliance.
Yeah. So that's helpful.
This
Dalia?
is a very, very important point, because if you really want to see how awful the Red-Green Alliance is, go to the Middle East.
Yeah.
You will see it like manifesting in ways, unimaginable, and somehow it was exported to here too. But to the point on the Obama administration, I have a special place in my heart for President Obama, for what he represented as young person from a Black American background, and getting to power, supporting youth movement in the region, liberal democracy, and all of this stuff. However, he made a huge mistake afterwards when he thought that maybe under the influence of the Islamists who were promoting this lie here, that the Muslim Brotherhood and such groups are the only groups that should be supported if you want a different Middle East, or a Middle East free from dictators, not understanding that they are just as dictatorial as the autocratic dictators.
And we have to remember also President Obama, when he was elected, usually the President of the United States does a first visit to the United Kingdom or to Canada. He went to Cairo.
To Cairo.
And
yeah.
at his big event in Cairo,
He insisted.
Cairo University, yeah. I was in the room.
You were in the room.
Yeah.
President Obama invited the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood.
Over the objection of the Egyptian
Yes.
government.
They were the honored guest in the front row.
They were in the front row, that's true. That's
and
true.
that to me was an indication of a catastrophic foreign policy, which on that day I watched. It was early in the morning here. I watched it live on television. I was shocked. I was hoping it was a mistake, but this was the beginning of an approach of the American government that set the Middle East on fire.
Exactly, but I believe it was mainly motivated not by supporting Islamists for Islamists at the beginning, at least of course afterwards it became a disaster, but at the beginning it was mainly thinking that, okay, these are the only group, because we didn't have political parties like civil political parties or liberal or so. So they thought they are the only group that if we empower, we can get rid of the dictators. And the Muslim Brotherhood also had many supporters here who were advocating for them. And it was easy for the administration to fall for this lie. And they did. And unfortunately, it led to terrible, terrible consequences in the Middle East and here in the United States.
So Dalia, going back to the 1990s, there was the famous book by Samuel Huntington, The Clash of Civilizations. I always thought that there needed to be a second book called The Clash Within Civilizations. And within multiple civilizations, there is indeed an inherent clash. And that includes, as we're discussing, the Islamic world. You are uniquely qualified to take us inside the clash within the civilization of the Muslim world, between those who, one might argue, have kidnapped and politicized the religion, creating the Muslim Brotherhood, its many satellites, and so forth, and those who want, like you, to exhibit a different face of Islam, of coexistence, compassion, kindness. Take us inside that clash and assess for us, in a way, who's winning the clash right now.
Thank you so much, David, for this question, because many people, would hesitate to ask it out of fear of being called Islamophobic. But thank God nobody will call me Islamophobic. No one can call me.
It's too late in the day to mince words.
Yeah.
We're facing huge issues, especially for people like yourself who are a proud and observant Muslim.
Of course.
Who's in charge of the Islamic face to the world?
Exactly. This is a big question, and this is actually the reason why there is this interfaith civilizational clash, if we can call it, like internal clash in the Islamic world, between those who think that Islam is an individual practice, like the majority of moderate Muslims, The spectrum, first of all, the spectrum of Muslims is really huge. We have, of course, on the far right, the jihadists, the terrorists who think violent jihad is the way. And then we have the not so much jihadists like the Salafists. And we have the political Islamists. All of these are on the right. Political Islamists like the Muslim Brotherhood and so, all of these groups are on the right. But on the left, you have the Sufis, the reformists. You have also maybe a little bit on the left or the right center groups that I call official Islamists, who are Islamist institutions like Al-Azhar in Egypt, for example. It's an official institution, but it adopts the Islamist ideology that does not represent the Muslims. But the reason we have this huge spectrum is that over time people has not been able to live with the old doctrine of Islam. They wanted to reform it. They want to get over it. So we have all those on the right trying to push us back, keep us looking backwards to this era of the Prophet where life was much, much different from what we are now, era of wars and conquest and so, and the reformists who want to bring us to this world. I belong to the reformists.
I think that's pretty clear to our viewers.
Yeah, that's why I have a lot of criticism to this. But actually my first criticism is to the concepts we grow up learning as Islam, you know. To be very honest, there is a problem with Islam as we understand it today. And the problem with Islam, first of all, is that it's not a spiritual religion. And this is what not most of the people understand. It started as a political religion. It was all about conquest to tribes other than the tribes that the Prophet belonged to, and also to other countries later on when the companions or Al-Sahaba, they were on the mission to fight. Prophet Muhammad was not a spiritual leader, you know, praying and doing nothing other than praying and preaching. No, he was a military warrior. He was a military leader. He was a commander who would carry a sword and go to the field and fight and kill people. So this image, because there were no reform made over time about this image, it has become the same image that groups like ISIS, Daesh today adopt, and they even carry the same flags, dress the same way they were wearing at the early days of Islam, and so claiming that they are just following the example of the Prophet, you know, and his companions. But look what they are doing today, which is very, very dangerous.
On a positive note,
yeah,
I am hopeful that the peace process is beginning. We're hearing some reports out of the Middle East that maybe there'll be rapprochement with Israel, that there'll be an agreement with Saudi Arabia. If there's peace emerging with Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, and other, Jordan, and other,
possibly Indonesia,
yeah,
which is key as the world's largest Muslim majority country.
yeah, Lebanon.
Would this empower the reformist elements of Islam in the region, of an agreement?
100%. Actually, there were a very strong reformist movement that started a few years ago. It started from Egypt because, you know, it's the most populous country in the region and also an intellectual center for the region, kind of. So it started in Egypt and it started to move to other countries. The ones who picked it really well and worked on it really well are Arab Gulf countries. And the reason for that is that they are mainly pragmatic countries. They just want to move forward. They have clear visions, you know, 2030, 2050. They focus on domestic development. They want to be great as part of their also tribal competition with each other. So each of them wants to be better. So they are focusing on the future. So from a pragmatic point of view, they are very much into this reform, Islamic reform movements. However, on the other side, countries like Egypt, yes, we witnessed a success for the Islamic reform movement. It was great, despite the terrible opposition from institutions like Al-Azhar and Islamists. It was great in the past few years because the real actors who had great influence on ordinary citizens in rural areas and so, like the Muslim Brotherhood and the Salafists, were disempowered after the fight against them by Arab countries who unified to fight them in the aftermath of the Arab Spring: Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Bahrain. You know, if you remember the quartet, they called themselves. And they also fought very hard against the influence of Qatar on these groups and how Qatar is empowering these groups either through money, or through media campaigns and the huge PR machines that it has. So we witnessed a success for the reform movement and a decline or weakness of the far-right Islamists, or this group of the spectrum, you know. However, when October 7 happened, unfortunately, this empowered all the radical Islamists who were hiding under the ground to come back again to the surface and lead the public opinion under the flag of supporting Gaza. And eventually, it has now turned to the flag of supporting Hamas, clearly supporting Hamas, supporting the Islamic Jihad against Israel, and brought back to the forefront all the anti-Semitic sentiments that the government in Egypt, I mean, many people may be surprised to know that the Egyptian leadership, President El-Sisi himself, he led some campaigns in the past 5 years to clarify school books or text books in a school that has anti-Semitic content, stop media production of anti-Semitic content, and even renovating some synagogues and churches and such things. Despite this reform, once again, all of a sudden, people just put this aside. And this reform, I mean, government-led reform was mainly motivated by the good relationship with Israel in the past few years. Now, all of this is put aside. Islamists are back on the top, leading the public opinion. And unfortunately, I don't know how to cure it now. It's very, very complicated.
Well, if we're looking for cures, let me ask you about another search for a cure. Gaza. President Trump came out with a proposal that many saw as totally from left field or right field. They claimed it was completely unrealistic. And then Foreign Secretary Secretary of State Rubio said basically to those people, well, give us a better idea. Do you have any better ideas or good ideas? Because what's happening in Israel, I believe, is that there is less and less confidence in any possibility of a two-state solution anytime in the foreseeable future. Not that people don't want it, but they don't see how it's attainable and sustainable. So if that's not attainable and sustainable, and President Trump's proposal is not attainable and realistic, for someone like yourself who's an advocate for peace and coexistence and who knows something about Gaza, after all, it borders Egypt. Yes, world, Gaza borders Egypt and not just Israel. Please remember that. What's the solution? What's the cure?
Wow, what a big question. You know, if I tell you how many groups have been involved in Israelis and Arabs in the past few days just trying to answer this question, you wouldn't believe it.
So you have practice.
So exactly. So I believe the biggest problem here is that we are not focusing on the real problem. Of course, I mean, the very wild statement that President Trump made was shocking to everyone. I believe even to Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was with him in the same press conference when he said that. If you look at his face, he was really shocked. However, I think President Trump made this on purpose. Why? Because it's kind of giving a kick to Arab leaders to do something. For a while now, they have been looking at Gaza.
And not just to do the same thing.
Not the same thing.
So I agree with you. I think he did it very consciously.
Yeah.
Because he was saying, if the goal of this exercise is simply another ceasefire, we've been there 10 times before.
Reconstruction,
we know how it will end with a break of the ceasefire by Hamas. So I'm gonna mix up everything.
Exactly.
And now you come up with better ideas.
Exactly. This is the thing. So
is there a better idea?
There is, of course. I mean, the big question now, or the big dilemma for Arabs now, is that a group of them, that's why they are unable to meet, by the way, and the Arab Summit that Egypt called for has been postponed. The biggest question is that Egypt don't want the Palestinians and the Gazans. Why? Because they know everywhere they go, they wreak havoc, and Egypt is not ready to deal with this. The same thing for Jordan and so on. And why they wreak havoc very quickly? Because their identities, there is nothing called one entity that we can call Palestinians, you know, or one identity. However, the only thing that unifies all Palestinians is this identity of victimhood and violent resistance, al-muqawama, you know. These are the two things that is that can describe the Palestinians. So, of course, nobody wants this, especially Egypt that does not want to get into war with Israel. It's not going to benefit Egypt in any way. So Egypt is calling upon all the other Arabs to help us provide a solution for Gaza. However, all the other Arabs are now looking at the situation and saying it's your problem. Like, deal with it to Egypt. Because we have other priorities. In Saudi Arabia, they have 2030 vision coming up in 5 years. This is a priority. They wouldn't spend money in Gaza. Even the Qataris are saying for Egypt, okay, we will pay you money and you take care of Gaza. Why they don't want to invest? Because, well, they invested many times before and it ends up the same way, the same scenario. Hamas launches another attack, Israel responds, Gaza is demolished and they go back and do reconstruction. The same story every time. Even from the leaks we are seeing from the Egyptian plan that it wants to offer to counter the Trump plan, nothing new. It's exactly the same, nothing new. It's exactly the same they used in previous episodes of war between Hamas and Israel and ceasefires and so. So the challenge now is not to build two states and this stuff, but to get Arab countries involved into rebuilding Gaza as Gaza, regardless of the West Bank right now. Let's focus on Gaza. Build it politically and of course physically, And to do that, Arab countries are saying we will never get into Gaza on the backs of Israeli tanks. In other words, they don't want to be invited by Israel to get into Gaza. So some offered, okay, so let's get the Palestinian Authority to kind of take over Gaza for a while, not rule, but take care of Gaza, or come back to Gaza, let's say, and it will be the entities that invites Arabs to get involved so Arabs can get there, like send troops, have security on the ground in coordination with Israel and so. However, realistically, the Palestinian Authority is a disaster too.
And does Hamas magically disappear in this scenario?
And by the way, in all the scenarios I've been discussing with my colleagues from different backgrounds, everyone agrees that Hamas cannot continue there for one more single day.
But it's one thing to say it, but how do you accomplish it?
It will. By the way, Hamas, regardless of the shows they are doing right now, the circus they hold every time they release a hostage to flex their muscles or so, most of the people, if you look closely, most of the people who are participating in these circuses wearing uniforms and so are just ordinary Gazans. And they are giving them these uniforms to wear so they appear that they are large in number. But they are not, they are, yes, Hamas sympathizers, but they are not all militants in Hamas. And you can tell this by the shape of their body. It's impossible that they are militants. So this is also something I know from people inside Gaza who told me this.
But the response to that, Dalia, at least from some, is Gaza has been so radicalized that we have not seen since October 7th even one protest inside Gaza against Hamas. We have not seen any examples of what we call from the Holocaust, the righteous who tried to save, in this case, kidnapped victims or tried to protect them, even at risk to their own life. So if Gaza is so radicalized, whether they're wearing the uniform or not, how do they become de-radicalized?
Oh, it's a big question. It has to do with education, and it also starts with removing Hamas from power, holding organizations like UNRWA and others accountable for what they have did to destroy the hearts and minds of young people there and children there over years. By giving them the content that Hamas wanted them to learn, which is a very violent one and all revolving around this idea of resistance again. So it's a huge mission and it wouldn't happen overnight, but it all starts with removing Hamas from Gaza. So the challenge now, okay, after Hamas is removed, for Arabs to get in, they will get in based on an invitation from Israel. They will only get in based on an invitation from Palestinians. So one of the solutions, and I'm just putting this out in the air, it could not happen, but one of the solutions out of the box may be creating a bureaucratic government from the Palestinians in Gaza.
Meaning a technocratic government.
Technocratic
Technocratic government.
What did I say? Yeah.
Bureaucratic, yeah.
Yeah, technocratic
so just
government.
to clarify what
yeah,
you're...
that's right. A technocratic government of people who are not political at all. And this government that is not military or political or anything will invite Arab countries to get involved, especially countries that has a border with Gaza, like Egypt. And let me say something here. I feel ashamed for what Egypt did to the Gazans, because they could have saved many lives if they only opened the border for a few months or a few weeks, but they didn't. They trapped the Gazans inside, and they are equally responsible for the loss of lives that Hamas caused.
And why do you think the world does not talk about that role of Egypt?
Because they don't want to make Egypt angry, because they think Egypt still has leverage over Hamas, and they still need it in the negotiations for ceasefire and so. But one day, no, they should be held accountable. I tell you, in the 2 weeks before I was forced to leave Egypt myself, I was trying to help some people escape the war when the war was about to start there in Gaza, particularly a huge family that I know part of them are in Europe, and the other part wanted just to join the other part in Europe. And actually we spoke to very senior officials in Egypt to get them out. They got the permits from Israel to get out. And we spoke to very senior officials in Egypt to get out. They told us, go speak with the tribes in Sinai, pay them money, and they will get them out.
Wow.
And it is corruption. The corruption with what happened on the border, the corruption with the smuggling of the weapons and allowing the tunnels to exist, that led to this disaster we are living today. The October 7 disaster is another thing. And also trapping the people inside and not taking them as refugees, the Gazans, are all things that Egypt must be held accountable for sooner or later.
And as you said, Egypt knew who they were dealing with. So bringing Gazans into Egypt ran the risk of increasing the strength of the Muslim Brotherhood. Meanwhile, countries like your country, Canada, and Australia are doing the exact opposite and apparently not learning the lessons. We have just a moment or two left, Dalia. I wish we had a few more hours. But help our viewing audience understand why you joined ISGAP and the special role you think that ISGAP can play among all these organizations out there. What's distinctive in your mind about ISGAP that attracted you to it?
Regardless, the amazing team, or if not to speak about the amazing team and how much they are dedicated, it was a great match to my cause, my big cause to fight against these radical Islamists. It's the only organization in the United States that is doing this work. And they are not doing it, ISGAP is not doing it only in comfortable, air-conditioned offices, not only writing theoretical issues about Islamism. And so we are very much involved on the ground, in the real fight. We are involved in the real fight, and perhaps we are the only organization actually fighting this fight in academia, on government level, on congressional level, and also in media. So how can I not to take this opportunity?
Thank you for saying that, Dalia. It's wonderful to have you on the ISGAP team.
Thank you.
Thank you for being our guest today on the ISGAP Hour. And JBS viewers, on behalf of Dr. Charles Small and myself, David Harris, thank you for joining us with this extraordinary guest, Dalia Ziada. If we're up to me, every American home would be watching the show, including the White House and all the other leaders of our government, of both parties. They need to hear Dalia's message. Dalia, your courage is inspiring for all of us. We're proud of you. And we look forward, JBS viewers, to seeing you again next week on the ISGAP Hour. Bye-bye for now.